Welcome to the Transformative Neurotherapy Podcast with your host, Dr. Heather Putney, founder and executive director of Transformative Neurotherapy. This is the place where healing happens faster. Because let's face it, your brain doesn't come with an owner's manual until now. Here, we take a holistic approach to brain health, bringing together science, mind-body harmony, and the tools you need to optimize your well-being. Whether you're a high performer, executive, athlete, longevity hacker, or just someone tired of your brain working against you, Dr. Putney is here to help you unlock your full potential. From brain fog to chronic stress, we're covering it all so you can finally experience brain health, mind harmony, and total well-being. Ready to get unstuck? Let's get started.
If trauma is holding you back, this episode explores how your brain can finally start healing faster than you thought possible. Welcome, everyone. I'm Julie Schwenzer, co-host and producer in the studio with Dr. Heather Putney, founder and executive director of Transformative Neurotherapy. Dr. Heather, let's dive into today's topic. How does neurotherapy help with trauma?
Neurotherapy is absolutely wonderful to work with trauma. As a psychotherapist, one of my specialties is trauma. And so I have picked up a couple of different trauma tools, EMDR, IFS, which is internal family systems. And I was really excited to see how well neurotherapy blends with that. So what I will say is that it can really unpack trauma, like energy that's kind of stuck in and kind of creating some of those flashbacks and things like that. It can really unstuff it and move it through. But one thing is that it shouldn't be done. If you have a trauma client, you shouldn't be doing neurotherapy alone. They really need to have, a psychotherapist or somebody to work with, because they're going to, have access to, information that they maybe didn't have access to in a different way. And it's able to kind of release and move through. And I see them regulate their nervous systems in ways that, move so much faster through the healing process. But you also want to have a therapist when you're working with trauma. It's not just like, oh, put them on this thing, let's put their brain and whatever. When you're dealing with trauma, there's going to be stuff to process. So, my sister company on Tether Therapy, we usually provide both. We'll do neurotherapy and then we'll send them in with a therapist, and they'll unpack or, kind of continue to process, tie a bow on what kind of came up and kind of keep the process moving in kind of in a healthy way. So that's something to keep in mind, but it's really quite amazing how fast it can move.
And what are some examples of types of trauma that you see a lot in your clients?
Yeah, I work a lot with, a variety, but we see a lot of first responders, and vets, so, firefighters, policemen, people that are exposed to, some pretty horrific things. And then, so that's one kind of group that comes in. And then I work a lot with, people with developmental trauma. So childhood abuse, things like that happened, or even adults that had some sort of traumatic event. Sometimes it's a car accident or this, that, and the other, and they're unable to even like drive for a season. We have to kind of work through some of those different things. So we see a variety. And another little subsection that I work with quite a bit are betrayed partners, people that just realize that their world isn't what they thought it was. It's kind of crumbling down, and they come in and very raw, very traumatized. Their sympathetic nervous system over arousal, they're hyper vigilant, and they're kind of living in a war zone at the moment, because their reality just shattered and they don't know what to trust and believe. And they just found out that their partner wasn't who they thought they were. So the person closest to them, was also the person harming them. And that's just extremely dysregulating. It causes them to feel really unsafe. So they're very dysregulated, and neurotherapy is a great tool to help them as well. I've also worked with people with unexpected losses, traumatic losses. So we kind of see the gamut on this. So.
And I was curious too, when they come in, do they, they first share their full story with you, and then, because it seems like a very heavy session all around with the treatment and from, why they were there to begin with. Is it a place where you also have a lot of discussion too with the client?
Well, it really depends on how we get the referral. If it's coming from a therapist that's in the practice and over, we if we're just doing the neurotherapy piece, we don't need as much of the story. We don't have to process as much of the story. But when I'm doing the EEG scans and analysis, I do have to ask about a certain level of information. So I'll have at least a sense of some stuff, but I don't want to really unstuff or unpack their trauma without, their therapist there or something like that. So I need to glean a little bit of what we're working with, so I also know what protocols are going to be the best fit, and also which sometimes we'll have people come in and they might say, I'm really stressed or I'm really depressed or really anxious, and they don't flag trauma as an issue, but there's some markers in the brain. So there's some things that we do with our heart rate variability where we see the sympathetic nervous system at as a 2-to-1 power compared to the parasympathetic nervous system. That's a pretty solid indicator that they're in hypervigilance. They're kind of, the sympathetic nervous system is stuck on, the autonomic nervous system is out of balance. Like I said, we see those a lot with first responders and whatnot, but anybody in kind of in pretty active trauma, you'll see that there's some markers in the brain, kind of in this T6 area in the parietal area, where we see maybe excessive power, some things that look like some dissociative signals in the brain. So that sometimes they don't say there's a trauma issue, but there's some markers in the brain. And so then we have to kind of come back with them because, like I said, what's amazing is, we're going to be stimulating the brain, and the glia is kind of like the glue of the brain, and it's kind of what can energetically kind of encapsulate some of the trauma. So as we're stimulating it, some things that have been like the trauma has been kind of like sequestered and kind of like put in the back shelf. Sometimes it just comes up, and so sometimes people get things they weren't sure was there, so when I see those markers and they're not copying the trauma, I'm going to, probe a little bit and also encourage them to get with a therapist and let them know it is very possible that once we start this, that the trauma is going to surface. The great thing is it's going to release, and instead of getting stuck inside and creating all this nervous stuff, the flashbacks, the hypervigilance, like you're going to kind of experience it and release it. But you want it to be kind of in a safe environment. So they need to know that when we're dealing with this and we're working with certain frequencies and whatnot, that it may absolutely unstuff the trauma. We may be trying to unstuff the trauma. We'll work with a lot of these clients on an outpatient basis, but we also get a lot that are in a really bad way, and they'll come in and they'll do an intensive. So we'll usually package them up. They'll do a couple of treatments a day, and we build in a therapist with them. And so, we'll do that for a week or two, up to 3 weeks sometimes, because they're in a really bad state, and the frequency of working and the intensity, it can just revolutionize from the difference between how they showed up when they came in and what it's like when they leave. So depending on how severe it is, they may go the intensive model because they just want to rip the Band-Aid off and get through this and be able to kind of get back to life. Because if you're stuck in hyperarousal and whatnot, like you're always on edge, it's sleep usually is impacted. And so there's just a lot of parts of your overall well-being and mental health that's impacted. So getting to the bottom of it is really great.
And how quickly do you notice some clients seeing improvements after they start the treatments with you?
Some, especially the ones that are really, dysregulated, they may notice a difference the same day. Like just in the sense that whoa, I feel more calm. My brain doesn't feel like it's racing as much. I slept better last night than I have in forever. That's not the end all be all where we're going to get, but it's not uncommon for people to, after 1 or 2 treatments, which if we're doing intensive, we'll do 2 treatments in a day with some breaks in between. But it's not uncommon for people to notice a difference even after the first, treatment or 2, but they will notice the needle shifting. That doesn't mean we're all the way there, but they generally notice things pretty quickly, which also is encouraging to kind of keep moving because, trauma isn't always fun to face, but it's, you can't outrun it. So it's coming for you one way or the other. You can face it with support and help, help it move through in the most helpful way, or you can try to outrun it, which just ultimately doesn't work. And then it kind of keeps haunting you in different ways at different times.
Thank you, Dr. Heather. That was incredibly insightful. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into brain health and healing.
You've been listening to the Transformative Neurotherapy Podcast with Dr. Heather Putney. Remember, your brain isn't supposed to hold you back. It's supposed to power you forward. So stop letting it crash your party and start letting it do its job. If you're ready to optimize brain health, sharpen your focus, and age like a fine wine, schedule your free consultation today at transformativeneurotherapy.org or call us at 412-204-7397. Because here, healing happens faster. See you next time.